Welcome back. Today it's my great pleasure to welcome Betony Vernon, who is the author of the book that I read and reviewed recently, the Boudoir Bible. Good morning, Betony. How are you?
Good morning, Charles. I'm well. Very well.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm very excited about this conversation. Just to give our viewers a quick insight into who you are and what you do, you are an American-born designer, sexual anthropologist, and author. Your aesthetic is formed from your explorations in spirituality, sex, sensuality, and the erotic body realm. As an author, you've published two books, which we'll discuss both of today. The first is the Boudoir Bible, which, as I said, I read and reviewed this summer, which I really enjoyed and really recommend. This was published in 2013 by Rizzoli, and it's since been translated into, I believe, 9 languages. Is that correct?
We're on the 9th, yes. Italian was the last translation.
Congratulations. Very enjoyable book. We'll talk about that in a minute. And you're also the author of a book that's coming out on the 6th of September called Paradise Found, an Erotic Treasury for Sybarites. And that's also published by Rizzoli. And that's very exciting news around this book launch. So we'll talk about both those books today. I guess my first question is a very basic one. It's around the title of your latest book, which is, what is a Sybarite? How is it that one identifies as a Sybarite? Are you a Sybarite? Why that word specifically? Tell us a little bit about that. I'm very curious about the specificity of words and so on.
Well, Paradise Found is the name of a body of work that needed to be entitled at a certain point because I started very young to make the erotic jewelry, and I had no idea that I was getting myself onto a lifelong path. And I know sometimes I wake up and I thought, God, I just began. And Paradise Found, because it's dedicated to enhance pleasure, well, we had to give a subtitle. So no one thought that they were buying a book that was about going to a tropical island or some paradise.
You have to be very specific about these things.
Exactly. So an erotic treasury for Sybarites became the second title for Paradise Found. I chose the term Sybarites because, well, it is a curious word, you know? A lot of people have asked me, what does it mean? Well, it means pleasure seekers and people who believe in the importance of pleasure in our lives, which of course is what has guided my whole career, my work, both as a designer, an artist, author, and also, of course, obligatory. I'm going to come out in Italian with you. By obligation, also a clinical hypnotherapist, because I began working around pleasure, but discovered that there's also a lot of pain in pleasure for some people. So the jewelry allowed me to unveil this fact. Of course, when I started, I was really young and I didn't have any idea that I was getting myself into something bigger. So yes, Sybarites are pleasure seekers.
Is it specifically sensual pleasure, or is it a more broad? Is it let's say synonymous with hedonism, or do you consider it to be very specifically focused on sensual
I think it's
pleasure?
Anything that's around the senses. We make this mistake of putting the erotic only in our sex lives. I think that the erotic can be in everything that we do. This is something that I encourage both men and women to explore. Find the erotic in every moment. Be present in the senses in every moment. So, I like to live an erotic lifestyle in general, whether I'm buying my fruit or taking a walk or whatever it may be with friends. It's not necessarily sexual all the time.
I think that's something that I got out of your first book, which we can talk a little bit about now, the Boudoir Bible. I thought it was a fantastic book, precisely around that sort of message, that the pursuit of pleasure in all sorts of realms that may or may not be necessarily sexual. I found that book so sincere in its guidance and very authentic in its passion around the subject. It revolves around a sexual wellness philosophy or erotic wellness philosophy that you call Paradise Found, which is in fact the title of your second book. Tell us about the origins of that philosophy. How did you build that philosophy? How did you construct it? Because I learned a lot in those two books that you wrote, and so I'm curious to understand your experience as to how you built that philosophy.
Well, I started very young, and I was working in the fashion system, and in a very prestigious store in Florence. I had a important window called the store is called Luisa Via Roma, and at a certain point, I designed what I called at the time Sado chic. I've coined a few terms thanks to the jewelry as well. When I started doing this, of course, in 1992. Anything that really had anything to do with sexual pleasure was not considered chic at all. Fashion has always tapped into sexuality, and by chance in 1992 and I think through 1994, there were designers like Galliano, Versace. They were working around bondage, around pleasure. Jean-Paul Gaultier was always working around pleasure. Vivienne Westwood was, the mother of the masturbation skirt. But to actually talk about enhanced sexual pleasure in the fashion system was not really acceptable. And I discovered this through the Satoshi Collection, which is a collection of objects that has a ball and ring. Can I show you the cover of my new book?
Please, absolutely.
So it was this series of objects, which of course is declinated in all sorts of different typologies. So, the whole story started there. And one day I had one of these Sado chic pieces, which I'm kind of known for, which are these bracelets and rings and chains that go on the pulse. And you can share it with someone. So I passed it during a lunch in Florence to my lover. And suddenly I felt like a current going through this piece of jewelry and between us, and he felt it too. And it was there that I understood that jewelry could have another value, not just an intrinsic value, not just an aesthetic value, but also the value of connection and reinforcing a bond, and of course, a bond that I consider the most important of all. There's not a single person on the planet who hasn't at least at some point believed that finding the right partner, the right sexual partner, the right partner in life, the right partner wasn't an important part of life. Of course, we go through life and it's not on the menu. We don't always meet our life partners. I always wish, in fact, I send a wish out to the world that everybody finds a life partner.
But it's not like going into McDonald's and ordering a Happy Meal, sadly.
No. It doesn't happen so easily. So in the philosophy of Paradise Found, it's important just to respect each other. And if you're really lucky, then you have this magic connection, which we cannot describe with words or anything else, that makes us fall in love with each other.
Which is something that goes beyond sex and beyond the more conventional definitions of sex around, genital pleasure, I guess is... what I got a lot out of Boudoir Bible was this ability to form connections outside of sex and outside genital pleasure. And what you're describing with this connection and this current, I think is very much at the heart of that philosophy.
Yes. When you talk about not necessarily having sex, I guess you mean not necessarily having penetration is your only goal, orgasm is your only goal.
Exactly.
Unless it's those massive orgasms that come when you spend more time making love to each other.
Right.
Thank you for correcting my semantics. I know it's important to be quite precise, and so thank you.
I think we have to be careful how we define sex, because today people still define sex as genital pleasure, and that leads to orgasm, basically. Whereas there can be lots of other pleasures, and when readers tap into the techniques that I explore in the Boudoir Bible, which is a catalyst, by the way, it's not a guide. I'm not there to tell you how to make love to each other, because that's not anybody's job, in my opinion. I just give you a big box of tools and ideas, and then you're off on your own too. Because every sexual encounter is also unique. I think one of the biggest mistakes is try to repeat a sexual encounter. Well, that will kill the orgasm. That'll kill the pleasure. You just can't repeat them, and this is what is so magical and mystical about it. Once upon a time, they used to say, and people still do say, oh, if you know too much, you kill the mystery of sex. And I always say that's not true. Don't confound ignorance or sexual ignorance with mystery. The mystery of sex will never go away. It just gets better if you have a toolbox.
Your latest book, so the Paradise Found book, it's a coffee table book, so it's a slightly larger format. I must say the imagery in terms of the photography, but also the jewelry that you present in that book is absolutely stunning. I mean, this book in itself is a work of art. The photography is curated across time. It's of your work as a jewelry designer, and it's an integral part of the Paradise Found philosophy. Part of that philosophy is around the Boudoir Box. I'd like to ask you a little bit around that. Can you tell the viewers, what does that involve? What is a Boudoir Box? You've built some for customers and for yourself, and so how does that work?
The Boudoir Box was an object, is a triptych-shaped object that I designed when, in the early 90s, I just got so much pushback. I was way ahead of my time, and no one wanted the collection. I had buyers from important stores like Barney's, which sadly is now closed, and who carried my classic collections, because the Erotic Collection is one of many collections that I've designed over the past 30 years. But when the buyers saw the Erotic Collection, they came up with all sorts of things, like, oh, we didn't know that you were so kinky or perverted or SM. And, I'd never categorized my desire to share pleasure with myself or others as something that was, kinky, which means out of place or wrong, perverted, which means sick, mentally ill, or SM, which is only into sadomasochistic games, which of course I adore and respect, but I never had categorized myself. And I felt very, very uncomfortable being put in a box because I knew that this would be an issue. And in fact, it was, I think there's a lot of, one of the things that the jewelry led to was a lot of projection. Also because I'm very private, my work is private, my clients, many of them are private. I'm a niche. I'm a very specific niche. My work is, I carved out a niche. Fact is, everybody was afraid to get involved because it was sexual. It wasn't just sexy, as is fashion. Fashion can be sexy, but can it be actually sexual? And the answer, unless you're speaking to Vivienne Westwood, is actually no, because it doesn't come off very well. Well, I think things have changed a little bit. I hope that my work has got something to do with that over the past 30 years of taking huge risks. I really took risks to put myself out there. In fact, people said to me, you are crazy. You may not be all of those other categories that you don't like to be put in, because I believe the categories actually limit everyone, both the person who puts them on people and the people that put them on others. No? I like to stay free. So it ended up being that in order to do this work, in order to continue to pursue this collection that I had, that was my true passion, that I was doing secretly for private collectors for the most part, I had to find a way to go to my clients directly. And they were all over the world. So I designed the Boudoir Box after having actually a full-blown vision. And thankfully, I was not alone when this happened. An assistant of mine was with me. And I saw it all. I saw it so clear. And I also understood. I was in Paris at the time. It was 1998. And I was doing sales in Paris. And I saw that at the time in this vision that I would definitely end up in Paris in order to be able to further the work, the research, the everything that became what I celebrate now with Paradise Found, an Erotic Treasury for Sybarites 30 years later, Charles. So Paris is also a very important part of my path. But even in Paris, there was no galleries, no stores. Everyone was very scared of the work. No, when I would say, oh, you can take this and spin it on the inside, like you can do with any of these pieces. No, you spin them on the inside and you have this incredible tool, which is also a jewel. No one's going to say anything about that, no? So the Boudoir Box was born out of necessity and after having a full-blown vision. I saw it very clearly. I was in Paris, we were walking, I was with my assistant, it came on to me, and I explained to her what I was seeing. Of course, when I finally shut up, she said to me, I think you're crazy. I think you're going crazy. And very shortly thereafter, she left me. So anyway, I pursued the vision, and the Boudoir Box, which is made in, has a wooden base, and it's covered with padded leather, and it contains on the surface 21 of my iconic pieces and can hold way more because it has secret compartments and drawers. And I would pack it and get on an airplane. Now, this is before September 11. So it was designed to be accommodated in the hull of the airplane. Today, it's tricky because it's very heavy and it's 69 centimeters by 33 by 33. So it's not as easy to travel with anymore. I still do it for very special occasions, but the Boudoir Box allowed me to turn any private home, any hotel room, any space, even an outdoor space, into a sacred space.
It's a transportable pleasure tool kit of sorts.
Yeah.
And so you had this vision in 98, and you built your philosophy and this Boudoir Box around that vision. I'm curious, in those 25 years, what evolutions and trends you've seen in sensuality, sexual practices in society or between individuals. What are some of the broad shifts that you've noticed in the last 25 years? Have we become more puritanical? Have we started new sexual practices? What do you see from your vantage point?
Well, I think that there's, a fine line. There's either the people who are seeking pleasure and the people who are still maybe unconsciously blocked and don't consider pleasure to be an essential part of their wellness and happiness and life in general. I believe that a healthy sex life is something that is integral to a healthy life in general and a happy life. I mean, it's scientifically proven. In terms of big shifts in our sexual scenarios, COVID was a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
COVID made people terrified to touch each other. We were told, don't touch each other. It's dangerous. Now, of course, there was a whole undercurrent of people that were like, I'm not going to do that. And one of those is me. I'm not going to completely stop connecting with people physically. I'm a very physical person. I am very tactile. I need to hug. I want to hug you. I want to, if you're my lover, make love to you. I can't imagine a life without physical contact. But this is what was happening. And something very interesting happened, and something very tragic as well. People started to suffer from skin hunger. We know the importance of touch. We know the power of a hug and contact and sex and pleasure. We know it. No, it's scientifically proven. It's not just me, having a go at it. So that is in terms of the past 3 years. No, I think that sometimes we live under an illusion that everything is liberated, everything is freed, because the sexual message is very much part of communication today. But sadly, that message, the abundance of that pornographic information that we all have access to from the age of 5 on. Children watch porn from the age of 5 on. We also know that it's something that completely destroys their libido by the time they're 18. It can really have an extremely negative effect on real sex. No? But I feel like we really have to defend our sexual rights more than ever. And this is because, again, as I was saying, the pornographic material, the information, the sexuality that we are confronted with in the media, for example, every day, without choice, is not equal in its diffusion to sexual education. And this is not helping anyone. This is helping no one.
Complete imbalance, you're saying.
Completely. Online, everything that comes up in terms of advertising or whatever, it's got a pornographic slant. If you look at Instagram, porn has informed fashion. It has informed music. It has informed our ideas of beauty, our ideas of what is sexy and what is not sexy. And this is not new, this has gone on forever. But we have these machines now that diffuse it nonstop. So I think we have to be very aware of that, and also not confound the diffusion of sexual information or sexual imagery with sexual information, because it's not. Porn, we know, is the worst teacher in the world. Porn is cinema. Yeah. Porn is not. But it happens to be the only educator that we have, the only source of sexual information that is real sexual information, that is actually readily available. But this being said, someone like me with a book like the Boudoir Bible has struggled because actual sexual information, the diffusion of sexual intelligence is not permitted. So you can diffuse sexual imagery, but not information with ease, no?
So, talking of books and dissemination of information, this being a book blog, a book account, I saw in your latest book that you mentioned The Story of O by Betony Vernon, which is a classic of erotic literature. And you mentioned this book as an inspiration for your work in jewelry. And I'm curious to know if there were any other books in your journey that had inspired you, and maybe not necessarily in terms of sensual pleasure, but in any other field. What were some of the books that really helped guide you in your journey?
Well, The Story of O was a huge source of inspiration, I was also reading it at a time when I was really delving into all the erotic literatures. And of course, there's Venus in Fur, which I happened to be in Florence at the time that the collection was designed, and I was tapping into all these erotic resources. I have to say that my work and everything that I've managed to accomplish to today would not have been possible without people like Dr. Kinsey, who took many, many risks to write the Kinsey Report. And, that's a good example of how far we've come, if you like, because he was doing his research and was very much in a zone of, no-go, pushback. It even ended up in the hospital. I think he spent time in prison, just like anybody else who had to do with sex at that time. One of my biggest inspirations is, of course, The Joy of Sex. In fact, I tried to pick up where The Joy of Sex got radically censored, because up until the 80s, The Joy of Sex did have a little bit of information about bondage. If you can get your hands on an original copy of The Joy of Sex, it does also talk about group sex, orgies, how to organize shared pleasures, And with the advent of HIV, it was edited out. So if you buy a current copy, it may skip over it, but it doesn't really go anywhere with it. So I thought, well, I guess what I can do is pick up where my forefathers and foremothers, Dr. Johnson, Kinsey, Betty Dodson, and people who got involved. Annie Sprinkle, who was like the mama of porn, if you like. They all, of course she has a PhD. They're all experts in sexuality. We are few. I think it's growing. I think this is one of the changes that's happening. But still, it's very limited. Because, we know in America, I believe that public schools are still not receiving funding if they teach anything but abstinence education. There are still so many limits. But again, to go back to your original question, how have things changed? We've kind of gone backwards in time. But when in 2001, after September 11, I decided to come out with what I was doing, there were no stores where a woman could comfortably walk into a sex store and buy something also beautiful and erotic and safely. It was just impossible. It didn't exist. This started to change in 2002, and I thought, wow, when Coco de Mer opened, I think it was 2002, which at the time was owned by Sam Erotic, and who's the daughter of Anita Erotic, who created Body Shop, exactly, which had also it was one of the first companies that had an ethical sort of approach. You could already in 2001 and before in the 90s take your packaging back, and Sam Roddick's take was very different, but in some ways similar. There was a holistic approach to sex, a positive, pro-pleasure, female-friendly approach to sex. This was a revolution because it hadn't really happened on this level in the center of a major city like London, where in 7 Dials in Soho, you can go down and just walk from a luxury hotel on the front into a very luxurious environment, safe and clean, and with a beautiful choice of objects that are also body safe. One of my big pushes throughout the past 30 years has also been around body safety, whether it's instructions or materials. The sex industry is not really very safe. If you're using plastics that are flexible, you need to make sure that it has a tag on it that says body safe. Otherwise, it's not. We know that it's not. So,
you were very specific about that in Boudoir Bible, and there was a great amount of safety written into that, and I thought that was very important.
Yes, I did too. It's another reason why I wrote the book. The reason I wrote the Boudoir Bible, and the reason I was so happy to tell the story in Paradise Found, is because it is complex, and there is no information about that. The difference between Paradise Found and Erotic Treasury for Sybarites is one, that it's fruit of 30 years of work, and two, that it's about the jewelry. The Boudoir Bible is democratic. I didn't want to talk about my jewelry because not everyone can afford my jewelry, but everyone can afford the Boudoir Bible.
So talking about your jewelry, in the book, it seems there's a very wide range of these beautiful objects. Your jewelry is stunning. And I'm curious, for any of our viewers, if you had to recommend an introduction into your work, into your jewelry, what would that be? What are some of the more sophisticated pieces in there? And then what are the pieces that you consider to be really the best pieces in your collection? How would you advise somebody to enter your work and gradually ramp up?
I guess if we were to talk about my philosophy of the Paradise Found ceremony and the boudoir in general, it is also very much a conversation around our emotional and not only our physical, but also our spiritual state of mind. It is so naive to think that you can just go around and have sex with everybody on the block and not be affected by it in one way or another. It's an atomic energy force. It is the seat of our vital energy, So there is an object called the petting ring, which forces us to do the key mudra, which is of course also for hand jobs or whatever. But we start with this gesture, and the ring actually forces you to do that. So suddenly the wearer is more centered. And because this gesture actually has a physical effect on the whole body, it also affects the way that we breathe. If you want to do a little test, you can see for yourself. You do this and you breathe and you see where the air is traveling in the lungs. In meditation and yoga, we use that gesture to stay concentrated, which is also something very important when we are making love to someone, to be concentrated on the pleasure, on the sensations.
Present and mindful in the process.
Yes, be present. If you're thinking about what you forgot to do, you're not there. And I always talk, even in the Boudoir Bible, as you know, it's sort of a meditation on the senses, which allows you to stay very present with your partner and speak that language in a broader sense. I really consider that there's no better way to communicate with someone than to make love with them. We know that it has a bonding effect. It has a connecting effect. It can resolve a lot of issues of the day if it's done with the intent to really just escape, I guess, the real world or the world outside and move into that frequency, which is, again, it can only happen if we make love. We can't buy it. We can't demand it. We can't get it on order. You can't, if there's no connection, there's no connection. So you can get a certain thrill out of cheap sex or fast sex or sex with lots of different partners over and over again. But the idea is the value of it, and how do we build that, and how do we keep that magic energy that does put two people together in that crazy, inexplicable way? How do we keep that fueled, you know? And so the interesting thing about Paradise Found, an Erotic Treasury for Sybarites, is that I actually do talk about the work. I do talk about the jewelry. I do talk about the use of the jewelry, and I do talk about the journey as well. It's a real emotion for me because, of course, I'm celebrating 30 years of this collection, and what better way than with a volume dedicated to it. And it contains imagery of so many different artists. I guess they're about 50. I say we because every once in a while, well, you'll definitely see my face. Sometimes it was very complicated to get people to take their clothes off, to get bodyscapes, and I was often in front of the camera with the jewelry.
Yes, you are featured. You are featured a bit in the book yourself from different times, and it's always very tastefully done, beautifully done, and it's very artistic. Ultimately, I mean, I've got it now on my coffee table.
Oh,
it's a very beautiful object that you've put together.
Thank you so much. Rizzoli did an amazing job, per usual.
Absolutely.
And it's not easy to put 30 years of work from 50 different artists all together in one volume and get it to feel consistent. No, and I think this is what we managed with the help of the art director, Thomas Linthal, to do really successfully. It was one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, I guess that's what connects all the imagery and the text is ultimately your philosophy and your lifetime's work, and it comes out that it connects that picture from the 90s and this picture that was taken last year. It all is very coherent in that sense. And so now I guess my final question is, you've brought out these two wonderful books. What are your future literary projects at this time? Do you have any ideas for future books? Are you working on anything at the moment?
Oh, yes, I am. I'm working on a book. I will not tell you the title, but it does deal with the issues of censorship around sexual information. And it will not be a picture book the next time. Because, of course, as I matured with my work over the past 30 years, I also came to finally understand what it means when people say, you know, sex is power, sex is politics. Sex is not just pleasure, sadly. No, I try to keep a focus on pleasure. But again, as I said at the beginning of the interview, there's also a lot of other things that need to be discussed. And I thought it was not the place to do it in the Boudoir Bible. I want the Bible to be a book that accompanies lovers for the rest of their lives. And that's what it's doing over the past almost 10 years now, because we were published in 2013. It's had some rewrites. It's had some, I think this is another thing I'd like to work on from a literary point of view. I think it's time to do a new edition of the Bible. There's constantly things happening that need to be updated. The latest update, I think, was 216, which happened with the French edition. So then the new edition of the red edition of the Boudoir Bible is actually the updated one. There's been some advances made in terms of HIV prevention with PrEP and other pharmaceuticals. These things have been added. Of course, in the new edition, I also talk about the online dating and the apps. And I did quite a bit of research before I actually wrote those chapters. And I held some salons where I had users of the apps come in and discuss their experience with it. And it was interesting because it proved my point. After about 3 months of getting anything you want every day, 3 different partners every day, every week, 4, 5, 6, sometimes 2, 3, 4 a day. I mean, I've heard some wild stories around that. It does leave one feeling rather empty. So, and it can become an addiction, of course, because, you know, you keep going back for more to try to get some sort of dopamine.
Some fulfillment or validation.
There's no connection. So talk about the advantages of it and also the things to be aware of, you know, out there in the virtual dating scenario. And so I guess there would be an update as well coming at some point, as soon as I have time.
When is this future book planned for release theoretically?
Well, we're working on it now. It's got a lot of research that is also required because I will speak not only of censorship, but also of lots of the isms, no? And the impact of shaming and all of these things that are now, you know, really out in the open, which I think is really important. But from a personal point of view, I think that if we can, I mean, my goal is to speak of things as I do when I write. I don't write fiction, you know, I write fact. Is to the best of my ability. But I believe that through my experiences in this realm, I've learned a lot. I have discovered where there are incredible impediments to our wellness, to the integrity of society as a whole. If we continue to shame the body, shame pleasure, live in the wrath of taboo. I mean, today we are talking about taboos, not only about pleasure, but around love, you know. The younger generations, they're laughing at each other when somebody says, I fell in love with him. You know, there's a bout of laughter, you know, that goes around the group because they now believe that you should just be free and live a free life. And when someone actually, through that freedom, because I also believe in that freedom, but in that freedom, if it happens that you make a deeper connection, then that should be celebrated. But there's shaming around the word love, believe it or not. I think that there are a lot of things that need to be aired.
Well, while we wait for that book, our viewers can certainly turn to your first two books, the Boudoir Bible and Paradise Found, two amazing books. And I think that's all we have time for today. Betony, thank you so much for your time and answering my questions. I really recommend both your books to anybody who's watching us. They're very enlightening on the subject of sex and sensuality. And I certainly hope that your new book is performs as well as the first book did and gets translated into as many languages as possible.
I hope so too. Thank you so much, Charles. It's been such a pleasure. Really, honestly, such a pleasure.
Me too. Thank you so much,
Cheers.
Betony.
Au plaisir.
Au plaisir. Bye, Betony.
To pleasure. Bye.